respond to a couple of things that have been said by some of my good Democrat friends. First of all, Senator Merkley talked about reducing our dependence on foreign oils to run this machine called America. We can do it. We can do it overnight. Right now, we have the largest recoverable reserves of coal, natural gas, and oil of any country out there, including China, including Russia. The problem is political. We're the only country in the world whose Congress won't allow us to explore our own resources. That can be done. That's an easy thing. And I would say to my good friend, Senator Whitehouse, you weren't in here when we were talking about the science initially, and I would only say, we can argue about this as long as you want to argue about it, and people who have said the science is settled, the science is settled, the science is settled, and they say it over and over again, hoping that if they say it enough times, they'll believe it. And yet the guy who's in charge of all the science with IPCC is Dr. Phil Jones. Dr. Phil Jones says, I don't believe the vast majority of climate scientists think the debate is over. That's a very simple thing. That's the guy who's in charge of the IPCC. Now, since it was said trivial mistakes, Senator, I think it was Sanders made that comment, we may think it's trivial here, but if you look over at, overseas at what's happening, the Financial Times has called for an independent investigation of the IPCC report. The Atlantic magazine, the stink of intellectual corruption is overpowering. The Daily Telegraph, this scandal is the greatest scientific scandal of our generation. Our magazines over here, the Chicago Tribune editorial, global doubting, the UN's credibility on climate change is in tatters, and what's going to affect the debate. The Atlantic says that the stink of intellectual corruption is overpowering. The Guardian, and they were on the other side of this issue, said, I was too trusting of some of those who provided the evidence I championed. I would have been a better journalist if I had investigated their claims more closely. The same thing is true of the Washington Post, Newsweek. There isn't time to go over that, but I will have those submitted into the record. Now, one of the things that's been said over and over again is the question that it's not really just the IPCC. Well, I read Administrator Jackson's report saying for the proposal, the agency relied in large part on the assessment reports developed by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. I believe that. I know that's true. However, if you look at the various statements that is made, no, this is NOAA is saying this, the Defense Department is saying this, the Lawrence Livermore National Lab and all that. This is the thing that's kind of interesting. In the TSD report, that is the technical, what is that called? The technical support document of the endangerment finding. This refers to 67 different documentations from science, of which 47 are the IPCC. Now, some of the others that are reported, the other 20, those people also are IPCC, but they're not identified as that. For example, the Dr. Benjamin Santer, who is the current research scientist at the Program for Climate Model Diagnosis, Lawrence Livermore, but he's also an author of the IPCC. Gavin Schmidt, that's NASA. Everyone's talking about, no, NASA came through with this. Well, NASA did, but this guy's also a reviewer for the IPCC assessments. Dr. Susan Solomon, current senior, that's NOAA. She also was one of the authors of this report. So when it gets down to it, the bottom line is that the science came from the IPCC. That was the collection point. All the scientists were there. And my concern still goes back to this. I fought for years on the floor of the United States Senate to keep us from going down the road of financial destruction and having a cap-and-trade type of approach. And I'm talking about the McCain-Lieberman bills, 03, the McCain-Lieberman bills, 05, the Warner-Lieberman bills, the Boxer-Sanders bill, all of these. The one thing they had in common, it was cap-and-trade, which is essentially what we would be doing, even though it's being denied, it'd be doing it through regulations. Now, what's the cost of that? I'm not, I don't claim to be the economist, but I know the MIT, the Wharton School, CRA, and all the rest of them said somewhere in the range of $300 to $400 billion a year, that would be the largest tax increase on the American people. And by the admission of the Administrator Jackson, this would not reduce CO2 reduction if we'd passed any of these bills. And the same is true, I'd have to say, with doing the same thing through regulations. So here we have an endangerment report that's based on the science from the IPCC, which has been totally discredited. And I think somebody has to say this, because when the hard times come, when the increases, when the overregulation hits the American people for no useful purpose, because it's not going to reduce CO2, then someone's going to have to stand up and say, we knew all the time that the science was cooked. That's my question.